Hi, I'm attorney John Mangan. In my approximately 15 years or so of practicing in the area of trusts and estates, I've fielded a lot of questions from clients about asset protection, both for themselves and for their loved ones. I'm here today to talk with you about something known as a domestic asset protection trust, or DAPT for short. We get a lot of questions from clients about this topic. So let me give you a little bit of the historical background on DAPTs and explain what they are. A DAPT is a very particular type of an irrevocable trust. Now, it's generally self-settled, which means that the individual or the settlor that's setting up the trust may also be a beneficiary of the trust, which is different than what you typically would find in your average irrevocable trust. DAPTs originated offshore in jurisdictions like the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, the Cook Islands. So it's like a foreign asset protection trust, but a DAPT is sitused or located here in the United States, which means that generally it's going to be more accessible and generally more cost effective than setting up a foreign asset protection trust. Now, there is somewhat of a catch on these DAPTs, and that is that not every state allows for their use. Currently, the count is approximately 17 states that have codified legislation for DAPTs. Florida is not one of them. With that being said, it does not mean that a Florida resident cannot have a DAPT. It just means that should a Florida resident desire one, we may need to find a jurisdiction that's appropriate and locate a trustee in that jurisdiction to serve. So, for example, states like Nevada, Delaware, South Dakota, these are very popular jurisdictions domestically for setting up DAPTs because they have some very favorable laws. And we have relationships with trustees in all of those jurisdictions who can potentially serve if someone wishes to set up a DAPT. I mentioned briefly a moment ago that one difference with a DAPT compared to a typical irrevocable trust is that the settlor may be a beneficiary of that DAPT trust. They might not be the only beneficiary, but they can be a beneficiary. Now, that's really significant. DAPTs and foreign asset protection trusts, these are, from an asset protection standpoint, really the only types of trusts that someone might set up seeking to get asset protection for themselves. So DAPTs can be very attractive if you're looking to set up protection for yourself, not just for your loved ones down the road, especially someday after you pass. So if you are interested in the topic of a DAPT, there's a very important concept to be aware of that's known as fraudulent transfer or fraudulent conveyance. Unlike what the phrase seems to connote, this really has nothing to do with fraud. We're not talking about a crime here, but fraudulent conveyance is a remedy available for a creditor. Let me explain how this works. At the time of setting up a DAPT or funding assets into that DAPT, if you have a known creditor out there, possibly a judgment creditor, or you're facing a lawsuit, or even if it's just a reasonably foreseeable creditor. So something's happened, there's been no lawsuit, but you're concerned there could be in the future. That creditor has a remedy available, fraudulent transfer, where they can essentially unwind the transaction. So, for example, if you fund $2 million into a DAPT and there was a known or reasonably foreseeable creditor at that time, the creditor can unwind that transaction and pull all $2 million out of the DAPT. So it essentially nullifies all of the work that you've done. So the real key in having an effective DAPT is to make sure that no known or reasonably foreseeable creditors exist at that time. In other words, the coast is clear. Unfortunately, a lot of times when people come to us with questions about DAPTs, it's too late because they're already facing some sort of a creditor issue. So the important point here is if this is of interest to you, don't delay. If the coast is clear right now, now is a perfect time to look into this and see if it might be appropriate for your particular circumstances. Now, as you might imagine, this is a rather complex subject. So it's really important for you to work with an attorney, with a law firm that has some expertise in dealing with this subject. If our office can be of any help to you, please feel free to reach out to us either by phone or by filling out one of the contact forms on our website. We look forward to hearing from you.